But no, I haven't seen him. I assume he is here. We have to check on him. He has sometimes problems.
We're staying with you.
Okay. I mean, I have to kind of watch him. But I assume he's made it, and hopefully it'll be okay. No, we actually, we team taught. We have team taught a number of times together. I will just say our administration's not permitting that anymore, but don't ask him. But we actually have a great time doing it. We're very different, but also very close in some ways. But alas, good to see every one of you today. I hope you had a good Easter. Everyone have a handout. Got a little picture today. I know.
Who did the picture?
Well,
Exciting.
And what?
Who did the picture?
Yes, I should have. A little artist named Rembrandt.
Oh.
Yeah, I actually should have. I realized a little bit of credit and date and all of that would have been useful. I will mention it and give him all due credit. Yeah. This is, and I'm not a great art critic, but you'll see the light and darkness stuff. I'll talk about that in just a minute. Today we're continuing our parable series. And this one is and staying with Luke primarily, this is the parable of the rich fool, as it's usually called. I've tried, but you just can't avoid, if you're going to do parables in Luke, you've got to do the money thing, because it's all over the place. And those described as rich, whatever that means, are often, Jesus has some choice words for them. It really does dominate. In fact, the whole issue of wealth and poverty is very dominant in Luke's writings. And these parables of Jesus, many of which are unique to Luke, and this one again is unique to Luke, as was the parable of the Good Samaritan that we looked at 2 weeks ago. But there are others, parable of the rich man and Lazarus, parable of the, what I usually call the sort of the dishonest manager. Lots of, and I think I'm going to deal with that next week, but I'm not sure. But a number of ones dealing with this. So we will dive in and be uncomfortable together, shall we? Since we're not going to compare portfolios, but compared with the rest of the world, well, most of us, all of us, would qualify on the richer scale of things, I think. So we need to allow ourselves to be addressed. I will actually argue, you can already see from the title, that I think the parable of the rich fool, although it's the very common title, is actually a bit of a misnomer. The rich guy is important in this, but I actually don't think is the main character. In fact, the main character is what you might not expect, but we'll deal with that in just a second. Just a couple of other introductory things. Actually, this is the only parable. We're going to read it because it's not too long here in just a second. It's the only parable in which God makes a direct personal appearance. Now, and actually in the parable, I don't think God is the main character, although wherever God appears, God is rather important, to say the least. But actually, and I'm talking about a metaphor where God is master or father. Actually, Jesus tells the story, and God actually has something to say at the end. So that's a bit unique. So I'll just leave that there. We'll see what God has to say in just a second about everything. Another thing is, this is about, on some level, it's about retirement plans, just to make it rather relevant to some of us. Some of you are on one side or the other of that. Some of you have been very successful, bless you. Others of us are looking ahead and going, Actually, this week my wife was off all week and decided, and it's also, we kind of finalized taxes and whatnot, just, all that fun stuff. And she decided, we're kind of at that, kind of decided to look more carefully at the retirement scheme. Not quite ready, although she's readier than I am in some ways. But yeah, it's an interesting kind of thing to chart out. I think she can, in the next several years, sort of work things out. We pretty much figured, that I need to work till 92. 91's a possibility if everything goes right, and if you all keep having me back. Okay? But yeah, otherwise, yeah, I think I can make it, and I can have a week or two of to enjoy retirement. I'm not sure, but these things are kind of rough. The guy in our story is thinks he's pretty much retired in style and everything is good shape. So it has that interesting kind of very modern relevance, although it's an ancient story in ancient context. The other thing, just to get us going, since I do have a picture. Yes, and this is, I mentioned a moment ago, this is from Rembrandt, so it's quite a classic portrait, and I should have actually put his name and date, lest any of you think I drew this, or I just kind of tossed it off, over the weekend. And the portrait, just to kind of, this is the rich man, and actually it's usually titled The Rich Fool. I'm not sure if that's the actual title that Rembrandt gave to it. But it's just kind of some things to think about. I mean, the guy's in sort of the dress of Rembrandt's time, but you do have this, and I'm no super art critic, so don't get too excited, and many of you will have better skills here. But this is just a classic case of the, and I think I'm saying this right, the chiaroscuro. Thank you, that's better. One more time, please. That's good. That's good. Yes, I looked it up and I've seen it and I've read it a million times. Yeah, it's this incredible use of light and darkness that Rembrandt especially noted for. And the color did bring this out. There is some background that didn't really come through very well. But notice just where the light is falling. And of course, remember, this is a painting. It's just quite exquisite. But it really all kind of, everything is focused on, you can see the coins at the bottom. And then he's actually holding one coin, one of those gold coins, although it is somewhat darkened, which I think perhaps could be significant. The light from the candle is focused, the light's on his face, he's looking at this. The light is falling on the books around him, and these are accounting books, all about, he's working on his, checking up on his stocks and bonds and all that kind of stuff. And just his face is just so, the face is actually spotlighting on that one coin, and even the mantle around him. Everything is just so poised and focused there. What strikes me most, and just to keep in mind before we read it, is how really cluttered the scene is. How cluttered and closed in, which I think is actually really a quite brilliant depiction of this man's life. Though he is by all accounts doing very well, his life is about as small as you can get. And everything is just, he's just, he will talk about all his great barns and all this sort of thing, but the portrait just shows how it's all coming down to this one coin. Even the mantle around him, which looks pretty upper class to me, and you kind of have, looks like gold cloth epaulets on his shoulder there. But it has this sense of enclosing him in, even the thick thing around his neck. Everything is just very narrow, lonely, isolated. But he's got his coins and his books to eat, drink, and be merry by and enjoy his many years, which, as you probably know the story, he's not quite going to get. And I'm happy for you at any point, what you see here in the discussion and such, if you want to come back to this. I just wanted to sort of set us up for reading or listening to, however you want to do it, Luke 12, 13 through 21. A little bit of a setup before, and then the parable actually starts in verse 16, but here's the background, verse 13. Someone in the crowd said to Jesus, "Teacher, tell my brother to divide the family inheritance with me." So you have an economic setup for all of this. But Jesus said to this man, "Friend, who sent me to be a judge or arbitrator over you?" And he said to them, now Jesus turns to the whole crowd, "Take care, be on your guard against all kinds of greed, for one's life does not consist in the abundance of possessions." That's sort of the lead-in line. Because now, then he told them a parable. Listen carefully to how it starts. I'm going to be making a kind of big deal about this a little bit later. The land of a rich man produced abundantly. And he thought to himself, "What should I do? for I have no place to store my crops. Notice that first person pronoun just dominates here. Then he said, he's talking to himself, by the way, because that's pretty much all he's got. It seems. He thought to himself, and then he said, well, I will do this, self. I will pull down my barns and build larger ones, and there I will store all my grain and my goods, and I will say to my soul, or to myself, it could be, self. He apparently is having a great conversation with himself, just nobody else cares. You have ample goods laid up for many years. Relax, eat, drink, and be merry. But God, remember I said, here's God's appearance, and this is as God, not as master or Lord or some metaphor, but I mean God said to him, you fool, that's where we get the rich fool from, this very night your life is being demanded of you. And the things you have prepared, whose will they be? And then that's the end of the parable. Jesus then has this one concluding statement. So it is with those who store up treasures for themselves, but are not rich toward God. Rather painfully clear in its challenge and such. But it also, I think, some interesting, deeper levels that maybe we don't always get to. So let's see how it goes this morning. And as usual, please jump in along the way, and we'll definitely try to leave some more formal time for discussion at the end. Let's just start on the outline with this idea of setting the stage. I've been trying to do this with the parables a little bit, lest we simply deal with them as free-floating stories, how they often are presented. I think sometimes in preaching and teaching, just because we don't have time to develop a lot of stuff. But these stories do appear in Luke's narrative. They don't just come out of the blue. Jesus might have told them historically a whole bunch of times, but Luke has given them a home. And really all of chapter 12 is the context surrounding it. And I think one thing that's interesting in the first place is that there's sort of a large frame around this story. In the whole chapter, Jesus is talking about just the insecurities and vulnerabilities of life on a whole variety of levels, not just economic, but that's part of it. And there really is this emphasis, and you can notice on the outline, if you have an open Bible as well, in verse 7 of chapter 12, and then sort of toward the end at verse 32, there is this sort of exhortation, but it's also a word of comfort, do not fear. Jesus is very aware that life can produce anxieties and fear, not least in economic realities, particularly when things are tight and insecure. At this time, he is talking to people, most of whom were very vulnerable. We can all tell our own stories, of course, in our own economy. Again, rather different than the ancient world, but there is this sort of overriding thing where Jesus says, yeah, I know. It's a little hard to get by. It's hard to deal with the uncertainties. We're not in control of everything as much as we want to. But Jesus says, and he doesn't say it in a cheap way, fear not, it'll be okay. I mean, he argues on a deep level, but there still is this broad principle that as the children of God, there is this sense in which God is looking out for us. And there is a sense in which fear and anxiety have an answer in the overwatching care of God. I'm just reading, these will be familiar verses to you. Verse 7, but even the hairs of your head are all counted. Do not be afraid, you are of more value than the sparrows. Just a way of saying God has very personal knowledge of who we are. God takes care of the sparrows, it seems to be. Are we not also going to be included in that? So that's just a general principle. And then at the end, verse 32, he shifts the imagery a little bit. Don't be afraid or do not fear, little flock, for it's your Father's good pleasure to give you the kingdom. And he's not promising, as some interpret, that we'll all be rich and wealthy and whatnot. But little flock, nothing more vulnerable than little lambs and little sheep to all sorts of predators and wolves and whatnot. But Jesus is arguing, and then in a lot of other ways, in this whole chapter about we have a loving, caring, providing Father. And that's the frame around this parable. of this man who is not really thinking a whole lot much about God's care or anybody else's. He thinks he's got everything pretty much taken care of. That's the frame. The more immediate, as we just read, incident that triggers this particular story is while Jesus is teaching about all these things, someone comes up from the crowd and says, "Hey, Jesus, you seem to kind of know stuff. You have a certain authority about how you teach. My brother's not sharing the inheritance properly with me. Be the judge over this. Tell him to give me what I deserve." It's a, classic case of contesting the will, it seems to be. Probably the father has just died, and occasionally there are conflicts, are there not, over how to distribute the bounty, or even if it's not so much bounty, it's just, I want my fair share. I love Daddy more than you. So give it, or I cared for mom, right? Yeah, I mean, and now Jesus didn't really want to play this game with this guy. Just, I'm not. He could have said, "I'm not an estate lawyer." Okay, he does say, "Who made me judge and arbitrator over you?" I mean, this is not. But he uses that again, anxiety of this brother, both anxiety and greed, and also I think we can just say natural, I want what's coming to me. And he uses that little exchange. He doesn't really talk to this guy anymore. Then turns to the whole crowd and say, "Yeah, I know this is kind of what you all are thinking too." But then he goes to this primary principle. Life, folks, he says, is not about the abundance of how much you have materially. It's a very simple statement. It is a principle. But, what is the meaning of life? Well, lots of ways to talk about that. In more modern times, study after study has been done, the last couple of decades or so. Lots of concern about what makes people happy. And there are various semi-scientific ways. It's called, if you want the little code language that seems to pop up, SWB, which is kind of, subjective well-being. So you actually, this is kind of how people feel they're doing. If you think you're happy, that's fine. If you think you're happy, be happy. God bless you. That's kind of the idea. Happiness is how you define it. Well, anyway, there's all kind of studies, and people get called and asked at various times of the day about, are you happy now? And it actually it sounds funny and kind of trivial, but it's actually a good bit of scientific studies have been done on this. By the way, just so you know, it's kind of shocking to me, the most happy people on earth are the Danes, Denmark. And then second and third is like Norway, whatever up there in that kind of tundra, kind of whatever, I don't know. So apparently climate doesn't have much to do with it, or it's the pastry. I don't know. that would make me pretty happy too. But no, I haven't some fun with this. But bottom line, study after study after study, and this won't be a surprise to you. We probably didn't even study, but how much does money? How much does what you own relate to one's sense of happiness? And again and again and again, beyond a certain threshold, okay, beyond if you're just struggling to survive, you clearly need the base, but beyond that, there is just almost no relevant evidence that shows that how much you have relates to any sense of happiness. In fact, it can go the other way. Because of anxiety and worry about keeping everything you've accumulated. Such, I wouldn't mind, being a test case and just kind of see how it works out. And I'll be happy to say, no, after all that, I'm not really a lot happier. I do have more things, and they occasionally bring a little more fun. But no, yes, please.
I was just thinking of that. I think as you get older, speaking from personal experience, so many times I hear women particularly saying, "Oh, I can't wait to unload some of this stuff in my house with my children or grandchildren or whatever, because I've got more than I can deal with."
Interesting, yeah. And of course, on the other side, there have been plenty of studies done about simplifying and all this that can be, and we, of course, in our culture here, we're just glutted beyond belief with stuff.
Very acquisitive.
And when yes, we like good words that sound good. Yes, we're very, very acquisitive people. Yes, we're not greedy. We're just acquisitive. No, good point. And this again is like, we know this intuitively, but perhaps it's useful to be reminded. Life does not consist in the abundance of one's possessions. Jesus kind of puts that on the placard. But then he tells this story. Okay, again, the parable is a way to unpack that principle and get us to thinking about it in different directions. Now, let's move to the next point where we actually get into the parable proper. This is kind of a new insight for me the last couple of years. It's stared me in the face forever. But it's verse 16. It's the way it starts. It's the way that Jesus introduces the characters. And he does not say, okay, a rich man had The rich man is not the primary subject. The primary subject, and it's in Greek and English, is the land. Which is why I have started actually entitling. Titles are, there's nothing sacred about them, but that this is the parable of the misused or misunderstood land. Now, by the rich fool. Okay, the rich fool plays an important role. But there is something quite, it's frightfully simple, but it I think really, it's expanded the meaning of the parable for me, frankly, in broad sort of environmental, ecological directions. I'm not sure that was Jesus' point exactly, but because I think folks at this time were much more, should we say, in tune with the land and how important it was. But no, the land is the subject. The land, notice the language again, verse 16, of a rich man produced abundantly. The land produced. Now, the rich man, of course, in the way we talk about, oh yeah, I had a great crop. Man, or we had a great year, we produced this. Yeah, but Jesus, and it's so basic, but it's so important. Who produced this? How did all this happen? Okay, and of course we could also go into the point. It's getting a little ahead of things about the rich man. If he really has an abundance of crops, he's not doing all of the sowing and tilling and reaping and harvesting. He likely had a whole truckload of workers that he's not terribly concerned about. But he also seems to have forgotten about the land. But Jesus says, look, let's just kind of start with where all of this comes from. And really, this is actually a big point of biblical theology that kicks back to the beginning in Genesis. And I've tried to sort of sketch this on the outline, and you can check the verses. I'll be paraphrasing just a little bit. But in the first creation story, God says, first of all, let there be light. And then very early on, about verse 9 or so, the waters in the land are separated. So God says, let there be dry land. Well, that's fine. And this is in the theological presentation. This is not a primarily scientific account. But in the idea of how do we view life in the world? Well, God set up things with the seas, kind of kept the waters up there to rain again and from time to time, and then waters and oceans and lakes. But now that this dry land. But the most important thing, that's a good thing that God starts this. But then very soon in verse 11 or so, and I'm actually going to I'll make sure I get this right, and you're not thinking I'm just paraphrasing this. You probably heard this before, but and maybe this is old news to you. Here we go. Yeah. After we've got the land and the seas, and God saw that it was good. Remember, God keeps, that's going to work. Then, verse 11, then God said, let the earth, or let the land, put forth vegetation, plants, fruits, seeds, and it was so. The earth brought forth vegetation, plants yielding every kind of seed, trees of every kind, and God saw that it was good. Okay, we get plants and trees and all this, but who is producing that? Well, it's still the creative act of God. Okay, God is overseeing. But the language, Genesis has no problem, and the Bible has no problem saying that God has partners in this creative process. And that now that we got land, okay, land, do your thing. The land is producing. The land is the active subject, partnering with the creative life of God, but actually is viewed not as just this thing, just some dirt out there that we kind of got to work and manipulate, but actually as, if you will, living, breathing life, and it is producing plants and trees and all this. Now, I've already told you in other contexts. I mean, I'm no agriculturalist or farm boy, and all of you can speak more eloquently to this. But I do think it's important to start with the right subject. there is a kind of little e, if you will, almost an evolutionary process working there, where God says, okay, I'm in the creative process, but the land is with me. And then, by the way, when we get humans, okay, how do we get other little humans? No, it's not that, I mean, God could have kept, it would not have taxed God greatly, just every day to have, say, well, what's the quota today? Okay, I'm going to create 100 new humans. Okay? Or actually, today are the Danes, while we're on the Danish day. Okay? Today is created, they're going to be really happy folks. Okay? So let's create the happy Danes. Okay? And then the gloomy, you pick whatever people you want to be gloomy. But yeah, I mean, God could have kept it, but remember what, God does. Let's get back up. This is second creation account. God creates the first human, Adam, Hebrew word, not a guy named Adam. Adam. And some of you know a little Hebrew. Adam is created out of, out of Adamah in Hebrew, which is the word for earth. God creates earthling, or mud guy, if you will, whatever, but, earthling out of the earth. Adam out of Adamah. The land is, now God's very engaged in this, and I'm doing the hand thing because you have that image of a potter and shaping the clay and the dirt and all that. But the land is producing, okay, the first human being. And then, of course, the woman comes along, and then it's like, okay, now you two create the other human beings. Be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth, and then manage, oversee, not exploit and use up. I've given you all of the land and such. It's to be a partnership, okay? I'm fishing for the right language here, but that's actually biblical theology from the beginning. Please.
Am I remembering wrong? It seems to me somewhere in the Old Testament God says we are to serve the land. Am I remembering wrong?
I mean, that would not surprise me. Something's not especially coming in there. Certainly, though, the whole notion of respecting the land, taking care of it, working with it, the whole Jubilee traditions of letting it, and Sabbath traditions, every 7 years, letting the land lie fallow. I mean, realize, and people who are more dependent on the land, and we all are, but, I don't think of that when I'm pushing my cart through Martin's. That stuff it magically appears there. It came from some land, most of it, the bread, But and again, I wish, that sounds great. I think that is a very biblical principle that if not serving it, it's serving with it. It serves us.
I know a farmer who acts that way. He will never let one of his acres just get weeds and everything. He plows them under to serve the land.
That's great.
His wife is very critical of someone who doesn't do that. Now, Ray, plows that under and everything.
Yeah, no, I think that's wonderful, and this is not a new idea. Some of us who are very far removed from land and all the technology, we all know what we're talking about here. I think need to be reminded of these older principles. And Jesus just sneaks it in. I think it was very obvious. It's just something I'm recovering. And I do think it's extremely critical for the attitude of this rich man who is basically, has become so evident, he thinks he's just done all this himself. I mean, and it even got, and apart from the fact that he needed workers and helpers, is the fact that if God had not created this land and then the land had not produced and continued to, he wouldn't be anywhere. And there's just no sense of that. It's such a basic and foundational point, but it's embedded in the way Jesus